Good morning, everybody. Just letting everybody into the room just now. So everyone should be appearing on screen. We've got 14 people in total today. And just a reminder, we are recording today as well, and it's a meeting format as well. So just give it a couple more seconds. Hopefully my sound is okay. I'm just a bit wary of this headset, so hopefully I'm clear and loud enough. But just give me a shout at any point if I'm not. There's a couple of more people in the waiting room. Let's get them to join us. We've got plenty of time today. It's a 40-minute session, but we've got plenty of time for questions after Tom's presentation as well. All right, so 16 of us in the room just now. So I think we can probably kick off. So yeah, welcome to the webinar today. It's been quite a while since we had a finance focused session. So we're glad that we're kind of kicking these off again for the new year. And the finance focus sessions are really just anything to do with money matters. That could be funding, that could be social investment, or a range of things. We've been addressing in the past couple of years with these sessions. I'll be having a few more of these sessions over the next year as well. So I'm running slightly late today, but we've got plenty of time. So I will hand over to Tom at the Corra Foundation just now. Tom.
Okay, thanks very much, Duncan. Thank you for having me along today. My name's Tom, and I'm head of grants at Corra Foundation. Hopefully you can all hear me okay, and my sound's all right. My voice, on the other hand, is a bit ropey because I've got a really sort of nasty cold at the minute. So I'll attempt to be as clear and slow as possible, and not descend into sort of a coughing and sneezing fit. So Corra Foundation, we're an excuse me, it's not a great start. We're an independent grant maker. We're based in Scotland, and we fund a wide range of charitable activities and initiatives. While our remit is broad, we're not a generalist funder. So all of our funding programs are thematic and focus on different areas of social justice. So these include areas like children, families and young people, problem substance use, homelessness, human rights, gender inequality, anti-racism, mental health, and coping with the impacts of poverty, to name but a few. In essence, our mission is to support people, organizations and projects that aim to create positive social change and improve people's lives. Duncan, do you want to skip on to the next slide, which is going to form the backdrop to the rest of my presentation? So this slide is our 10-year strategy, 2020 to 2030, encapsulated in a single sort of visual. So I'll let that sit there. But what I plan to talk about today, what I plan to cover, is a bit of the history of the foundation. I'll give you a flavour of some of our funding programs, and I'll also highlight some elements of our current strategy, which you can see up there, and our approach to grant making. I'll obviously be happy at the end to answer any questions that you may have. Let me just lift that up slightly. So Corra Foundation started life almost 40 years ago, back in 1985, as Lloyd's TSB Foundation for Scotland, an independent charitable trust that was established by Lloyd's banking group to support charitable activities in Scotland. And like most corporate foundations, the money for our grant making originally came from an annual donation of a small portion of the bank's pre-tax profits. However, that changed in 2018 when the foundation took legal action against the bank, claiming that the bank had breached a funding agreement by reducing its annual donation in the years following the 2008 financial crisis. So that went through the courts. The foundation won the case, received compensation, and agreed to end its funding relationship with the bank. So in April 2019, we formally changed our name. We became the Corra Foundation, and we sort of switched from being a corporate foundation, receiving that sort of annual income for distribution from the bank's profits, to to a very different beast. So today the foundation no longer receives funds from the bank. It does have a relatively small endowment, so invested funds, which the income from which it can use to make some of its own grant making and fund its operations. But the vast majority of our grant making involves operating as an intermediary for other funders. So organisations that we now distribute funds on behalf of include Scottish Government, Comic Relief, the National Lottery, STV, and so many other trusts and foundation partners. The scale of Corra Foundation's grant making has fluctuated considerably over the last 3 or 4 years. In 2019, the foundation's expenditure on grant making was around £20 million, of which our own funds represented about £1.5 million. In 2020, that rose to 58 million, a huge leap, which was largely the result of the fact that Corra Foundation was heavily involved in distributing COVID crisis funding from the Scottish Government to support the voluntary sector. So during that period, our grant making increased considerably, and Corra Foundation is still involved in managing sort of crisis style funding now for individuals and families that are struggling with the cost of living crisis. And I'll mention a little bit more about that in a minute. So the level and volume of Corra's grant making will continue to change depending on the number of programs and the scale of funding that we have under management at any one time. Currently, if you look at our website, you'll be able to find around 20 different live funding programs that are at various stages of their life. Our 3 largest funds at the moment are the National Drugs Mission Funds, the Children, Young People and Families Early Intervention Fund, quite a mouthful, and the Promise Partnership, all of which are being delivered on behalf of Scottish Government. The National Drugs Mission Funds are a collection of funds that are operating over 5 years up to 2026 and will involve distributing up to £65 million to address issues connected with problem substance use in Scotland. The Children and Young People and Families Early Intervention Fund provides around £15 million a year of core funding to third sector organisations that are working to improve the lives of children, young people and their families in Scotland. And the Promise Partnership is a 3-year, £12 million grant making programme that's designed to support organisations to implement the recommendations of the 2020 Independent Care Review. By contrast, grant programmes that use Corra's own funds are relatively sort of modest by comparison. So we run an annual Henry Duncan grants programme that's existed for 25, 30 years, really. Actually, it still existed back when we were a bank. This programme has a value of about £1 million a year these days, and makes unrestricted grants of up to £8,000 a year for 5 years to community groups under a specific theme. In 2023, that theme is increasing opportunities for disabled people and people with long-term conditions. In 2024, it will be supporting people experiencing inequality or discrimination. And applications for that are likely to open in late spring, sort of April time, with a view to making decisions towards the end of the summer. We also co-fund a programme called the Partnership Drugs Initiative, which provides funding to charities that support children, young people and families affected by alcohol and drugs. One area that I'd like to mention that we're particularly interested in developing our work over the coming couple of years is in the field of human rights and supporting organizations to adopt informed rights-based approaches. So to this end, we've recently completed a consultation exercise working in partnership with other funders to look at what a human rights fund would look like if we were to develop one in Scotland. And we're also going to shortly be launching a fund in partnership with Scottish Government to support public bodies to embed children's rights into their culture, policy and practice. This will be called the UNCRC Innovation Fund, so UNCRC, United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. The vast majority of our funding is reactive, so we will design and launch a fund with a set of funding criteria and application guidelines, and we will invite organizations to apply. We don't, on the whole, identify organizations and make grants proactively. However, our approach to designing funds and our processes of grant making have changed considerably over recent years. So almost all of our funding programs now make use of participatory approaches, and they will involve external experts, either by their profession or by their lived experience in the design of our funding programs, the decision-making processes, and in helping us to monitor and evaluate grant holder activities. As part of our strategy, and you can see it up there on the slide, we consider that placing the voices of people and communities at the heart of the funding process and recognizing the wisdom and the knowledge that comes from their direct lived experience is best practice, and we want to build that into our the design and delivery of our funding programs wherever that is possible. Corra funds organizations of all different sizes, from large national organizations right down to very sort of small community groups. And sort of with respect to the latter, where we are looking to empower local communities and small community groups, we attempt to style our funding for these organizations to make it as accessible and flexible as possible. So an example of this, to come back to the cost of living crisis, is that in 2021 and 2022, we have been managing a household hardship fund. So this is designed to provide small grants up to £5,000 to charities and community groups across Scotland who can pass that funding on directly as cash or as vouchers to families and individuals on low incomes. The fund used a very, very simple application form. It adopted a very light touch approach to assessment. It did require community groups to have a constitution stating that they operate as a not-for-profit, but not to be incorporated. And most applications to that fund received a decision and a payment in less than a week from the point at which their application was sent in to us. I'd also say that in recent years, there's been a very clear move away from a sort of traditional model of only funding registered charities. There's a recognition across the funding sector now, really, that there are a much wider range of organisations operating on a not-for-profit and having impact on social issues. So our funding has become more outcome focused, and we are open to funding a wide range of types of not-for-profit, including SCIOs, cooperatives, limited companies where a not-for-profit clause and an asset lock is in place, and indeed community interest companies. We've also started to fund unincorporated groups at a sort of micro community level, provided, as I mentioned before, that they are constituted and operate on a not-for-profit basis. One of the ways that we've done that recently is through our partnership with Comic Relief, where we've started to use a process of what we've called fiscal hosting, or what is called fiscal hosting, for some of our local community grant making. So this involves using a company called the Social Nest to act as a fiscal host, which basically means the Social Nest are a legally registered organization, and they can hold money on behalf of a community group or a social movement or a project that either doesn't have the capacity or desire to register as a formal legal entity. The Social Nest sort of acts as a guarantor for those groups, and therefore provides Corra Foundation with a bit of legal assurance that the money will be spent according to the funding terms agreed. Assurance that we need because we're handling funds on behalf of Comic Relief, but does allow us to recognise that some really strong community work is being done by organisations that are often set up at speed in response to crisis. Finally, I wanted to say this to you as an audience of social entrepreneurs and social enterprises. Corra is very interested in funding and supporting radical ideas for social change. A relatively recent example of this is that between 2018 and 2022, the foundation worked in partnership with Scottish Government and a social enterprise called Social Bite, as well as local authorities and homelessness charities, to develop and implement a housing first approach to tackling homelessness in Scotland. So Housing First was a sort of evidence-based model, relatively new to Scotland, which basically prioritizes providing stable housing to people experiencing homelessness, along with wraparound support services to help them address any issues that may have contributed to their homelessness. This program was a first attempt at taking that model to a national scale by operating Pathfinder projects in 5 major cities. And that Housing First model has now been widely adopted across Scotland as the default model for supporting people with complex issues who are experiencing homelessness. So whilst most of our activity does involve acting as an intermediary for funders that come with their own areas of interest, their own outcome priorities, we are very much interested in having those broader conversations around ideas for social change and exploring how we can work in partnership with individuals, with organisations to take their ideas forward. Further information about all of our funds can be found on our website, www.corra.scot. They do change. There is a constant sort of flow of different programs starting, programs ending. So it's very hard to sort of give you what I've described today is very much a snapshot of a point in time. Yeah, and that's an overview of Corra Foundation and the way that we work. So yeah, very much welcome any questions that you have, and there may even be in the chat already.
That's great. Thanks, Tom. I really appreciate that. Yeah, just a couple of points to pick up on. I think there's a lot of stuff there I think will really reassure social entrepreneurs, actually. So you're putting the voice of communities at the heart of funding decisions, for example, that partnership approach for social change, which I think is really important as well. And also that, I suppose, that awareness of, I suppose, the different business models as well. So you did mention SKIOs, cooperatives, community interest companies, which I think is reassuring to social entrepreneurs. I think sometimes funders don't have that awareness, so it's really, really good for that. There's a couple of questions in the chat, which I'll start with first, and then we can maybe, if people want to put their hands up to ask questions after that, that'd be great. So there's a question from Becca saying, is there a way of considering inclusivity in funding applications when it comes to neurodiversity? So, for example, ADHD and dyslexia?
Yes, absolutely. So we do attempt to be as inclusive as we possibly can when we're designing funding applications. I just need to check, Becca, that so if I'm not accurately answering your question, do let me know and I'll take another tack. But yeah, we do look at when we're designing our application processes and our materials, that they are accessible. So more recently, we've invested in producing easy read versions of all our application materials, for example. I don't actually have an accurate sort of sense of the degree to which they've been used, but certainly with certain programs, particularly where we know that the organizations accessing them or the theme of the fund, is particularly involved in that area, we will develop those. Similarly, when we've had, we're sort of mindful of organizations that may be applying that don't have experience of developing funding applications, or that may be applying but don't use English as their first language. So we attempt where possible to offer support in that respect, either through the provision of interpreters or sort of working with them to support them through the application process.
Great, thank you.
Great. Sorry, Becca, so she said, do you want to come back on any of those points? Sorry.
I think it sounds good to me that you've got an easy read application, because I mean, I've done lots of funding applications for my business, and I have struggled with quite a few of them because of ADHD and dyslexia. So if there's an easy read copy available, that's fantastic. Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
Are you able to, like, if you're struggling with the wording of something, even on the easy read, are you able to contact and ask for some support with what you're looking for from questions?
Yes, of course. So you can easily contact us, and we'd absolutely want organizations to contact us if they were struggling with any aspect of making an application. So in most instances, there'll be grants, well, there'll always be grants advisors at the end of a phone to support with that. If there are sort of approaches that we can take beyond easy read or anything that I mentioned, Becca, that you're aware of, then we'd be sort of open to hearing that as well. Great.
Well, you answered my question, so thank you.
That's always good. Yeah, sorry, Becca, I should have said you want to ask the question directly yourself. I just read it from the chat, but yeah, sorry about that. I think Michael had his hand up next. If Michael wants to ask a question.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yep.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Yeah, my question is centered on the mission and vision of Corra Foundation, because from what you have shown us on your slide, it's all about helping people to live fulfilling lives and also to improve the quality of life. So my question is on, does Corra offer support to organizations that try to bring in enlightenment so that people will not be able to fall into such a victim position, to be homeless or to be lacking the good basic things of life, so that we don't wait until when they have such challenges before we can now have support for them. For instance, now we have this energy crisis that is driving so many families into homelessness and lack of food and all that. So does Corra intervene, like advising government on how to cut down on energy costs and also provide jobs, create job opportunities, like organizations like mine, Enterprise, like trying to make sure that people have the best they can do with their time and energy, so that we can better support people that way and not wait until when they become victims of some of these hardships. So does Corra have an intervention in that direction? That is to wage people from falling into homelessness, drug abuse, alcoholism, and all of that, because people fall into these debts because of frustration and hardships. So it's better we do something to wage people from falling into this kind of desperation, so that way to help people to live fulfilling lives. So that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope I've made myself clear.
I think
Thanks,
so.
Michael.
The audio wasn't brilliant, but I think I understood the gist of your question, Michael. So I think there's a couple of things to say there. I think the first is that there is there's always a sort of balance to be struck for funders, particularly funders focused on social justice, around getting support to people that are in crisis, that need help, and focusing on systems change to prevent these issues of arising in the first place. So on the one hand, there is a cost of living crisis happening that has happened as a consequence of political and economic issues that are sort of beyond any funder's control, and are leaving people falling into poverty in real situations of crisis. So we have a household hardship fund that is responding to that and is trying to provide very sort of quick access to a modest level of support that can just sort of help people with that. On the other side, Corra is very interested in looking at those longer term solutions, and it's why we're particularly interested in the application of rights-based approaches at the moment, and we're sort of working with Scottish Government and other partners to look at sort of longer term how organisations that can work in a way to sort of change their longer term working practices to support social change. So that's one thing, that sort of balance between funding the immediate crisis that's in front of you and funding the sort of more longer term areas of work that are designed to create systems change. I mean, I think the other thing to say for Corra Foundation is that our financial resources, our own financial resources, are actually pretty modest. So in foundation terms, our endowment isn't sort of very big at all. We generate about £1.5 million a year to distribute, which is quite small for a foundation. In overall funding terms, we're quite big because we manage a lot of funding on behalf of others. And I think where Corra Foundation has a role increasingly is to use our experience as a grant maker and use our experience as a knowledge of communities right across Scotland, and our power to act as a sort of convener and bring and raise their voice up as an opportunity to influence that policy and that process of designing interventions or designing funding programs to support that. So yeah, I think Corra's sort of quite young as a foundation in that respect, and but over the sort of last 10 years, we have increasingly sort of developed our relationships with partners, and particularly with Scottish Government, where we do actually have a good level of expertise in a number of different policy areas, and we can work quite closely with their policy teams to support that process of thinking through how they turn policy priorities into funding programs and get support out to the sector. Duncan, I think that was just a quick follow-up question in the chat around accessing an interpreter.
Yeah, if you want to come to that point, that's from Yaz,
so
GSAM.
Simply, if that is an issue, we'd ask organisations to call us and request that support, and we could organise it.
Great. Christina, have you got your hand up? If you want to come and ask a question.
Hi, I do. I'm just going to get what I was going to ask. Sorry. Hi.
Right.
Thanks for coming, Tom, even when you're not feeling well. So, I just wanted to ask two quick questions. One was that I had a quick look at the Early Intervention Fund. So we do mindfulness for early years children, and it looks like it's closed. Is that the case, or is it open and I'm misreading it?
No, it is closed. So the early intervention fund is it's actually coming to an end, that fund, to be replaced with another one, but the other one has also gone through its application process already, and we're just sort of waiting for Scottish government ministers essentially to sign off on the recommendation report. So no, that's not a fund that is currently open. It is a 2-year fund, the fund that is about to be, for which funding and the decisions are about to be announced. So that will run until the end of March 2025, after which it is likely to, there'll be a new iteration of it. So that would be for that particular fund, that would be the point at which there'd be an opportunity for organizations that either didn't apply this time round or would be interested in applying in future. It would be their opportunity then to sort of come into that that funding program.
Sure. So that's quite a way away. So is there anything specifically kind of featuring around about early years of prevention agenda that you have at the moment?
I don't think there are any other funding programs that would address that specific theme, Christina, but I will have a look. I mean, I'd welcome you to have a, you've obviously looked at our website already, but as I mentioned in my presentation, the funding programs under our management are constantly changing, so it maybe there's something coming along. Nothing strikes me. We are doing an increasing amount of work in the area of children's rights.
Yeah, I picked that up. Yeah.
So so whether there is something there like the UNCRC Innovation Fund, I don't know, because it's more focused on public bodies rather than voluntary sector organisations. But I'd certainly keep an eye on that. Have you come across Catanac Trust, Christy?
I've heard of them, but not specifically looked.
Okay, so they're a grant maker that's specifically focused on early years.
Okay.
So it's Catanac, CATTANACH.
Okay.
I definitely give them a look. They would be in a strong position to advise on either any funds that they have available, but also other funders that are operating specifically in that
area. Yeah. Okay, cool. And there's just one other really quick question was, do all your applicants have to be, I know you mentioned community groups and some of them don't have to be, maybe you have answered this already, but have to be incorporated? Or do you just have to have the asset lock?
So no, all of our organisations do not have to be incorporated. It very much depends fund to fund and depending on the funder that we're working with. So if we're working with a funder that says no, we only want this fund to support registered charities, or the purpose of the fund is only to support public bodies, then that will form part of the eligibility criteria. But in some cases, like the Household Hardship Fund, the priority was simply to get money out to people as quickly as possible that couldn't access it any other way and that were experiencing real crisis. So in that case, it was very sort of simple eligibility criteria. Yes, we can fund unincorporated organizations, but we do need to see that you have a governing document that makes clear that you're operating on a not-for-profit basis.
Okay, that's perfect. All right, then I hope you feel better. Thank you.
It's no problem.
Thanks, Christina. I see Arkan had a hand up in the chat. If you've got a question at all.
Hello, my name is Arkan.
Hello.
Hey.
Honestly, just a second. Honestly, Christian has asked the same question I had. It's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, she asked the same question.
Okay,
so
no worries.
Answer on his question. So.
Okay, no worries. That's okay. Yeah. And again, if you've got any questions after the session as well, me and Tom can obviously answer those as well. So if you have anything else you think about, that's all fine. So we've still got a couple of minutes left. I think Yaz from GSEN has their hand up.
I've got a quick question. So I just wanted to say thanks very much for your talk, and I enjoyed seeing the visual and everything. But actually we received a fund from Corra when I was doing some volunteering with Glasgow Mutual Aid in the pandemic, and it just really got us through and helped us provide direct support to people in Glasgow. I wanted to ask you, so it's quite interesting, like the way that your organization is run, that you yourselves have, you know, a smaller amount, and then you're managing these large amounts of money. And kind of, you know, as a response to Christina's question, it's a bit difficult for you to, you know, almost like choose what the money goes on. You know, you're at the whim of other people saying like, okay, well, we have this money for a prevention course, or we have this money for inequality and discrimination or something. So what's your hope for Corra? I was wondering, are you hoping that you yourselves will have more money which you have control over to give out to people, or are you just, does it kind of work quite well to be an intermediary as the way that your organization's structured?
Yes, that's a very good question, and it's a question that I think the board are asking themselves as well to a certain extent, which is, you know, what does the future hold for Corra Foundation? As I said earlier, we're still quite a sort of a young foundation in terms of, you know, what we've done since that transition from being a corporate foundation. I think what I would like to see is, you know, if we're talking sort of 5-10 years down the line, a foundation which has perhaps diversified a little more from its sort of position of acting as an intermediary, and predominantly an intermediary for Scottish government. So, you know, we are interested in developing more partnerships with other funders. The extent to which we'll become a fundraising organisation, I don't know. It's not something that we've really sort of dipped our toe in the water of, but that's a possibility that, you know, we create opportunities for sort of big philanthropy to come in, and sort of individuals that we're interested in sort of developing philanthropic activity within Scotland. So yeah, that's a possibility. But I suppose the other thing that I'm interested in terms of Corra's future is you know, the growing influence we can have on the style of the distribution of public funding. So, you know, we're still in a position where we have some funds where we will run an application process. I mean, historically, the way it worked is we'd run an application process that would be assessed by a number of professional grant makers, of grants advisors. They'd put a recommendation report together that would go to the funder, Scottish Government, and the funder would sort of sign off on it, and then we'd make the funding. That just increasingly doesn't happen. What we'll do is we'll design a funding process that involves lived experience panels. So there'll be a due diligence check done by a grants advisor, but the real interrogation and analysis of an application will happen, will be done by individuals that have that experience, either by through professional experience or their own lived experience, who come together and discuss it, and that's what will form the basis of the recommendation. However, in most cases, that still is a recommendation that goes to a policy unit that then goes to ministers to get signed off. It's, you know, there's only one fund so far where that decision-making process has been fully devolved, and that's the Promise Partnership. So the fund resulting from the care review, where it doesn't require sort of final ministerial sign-off, that it's been fully devolved to a panel of experts to make that final decision on funding, and I'd like to see more of that.
Great, thank you.
That's great. So we are actually at time just now, but if anybody's got any final questions, feel free to just fire them out just now. Otherwise, we can obviously answer the questions after the session as well. We can get in touch with me or Tom. Anybody? Last chance. No. Okay. So thanks everybody for coming along today, and big thanks to Tom for his time today as well. So hopefully we'll get some successful funding applications at this session at some point as well. Oh, there's a message in the chat. Is that a final question? Brian Weaver's making a point about reminding people of Just Enterprise, which is the specialist social enterprise business support service. So good reminder there, Brian. So yeah, so say any questions you've got, just pass them on to me, and I can raise those with Tom. We can get an answer for you as well. So if you think of anything after the session, that's fine as well. But yeah, thank you everybody for coming on today. Thanks to Tom, and have a good day.
Great. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.